I'd like to talk today about Parashat Mishpatim, but to do that, we should start first outside of Parashat Mishpatim, in what I want to argue is a related passage describing the Choshen Mishpat, the breastplate worn by the high priest that is studded with gems. As we know, there are 12 gems for the 12 tribes, the 12 Shvatim of Israel, and those are arranged in rows. There are 4 rows. And so we have verses a bit later, but not much later in the Torah, that are describing which types of gems are in each row and exactly how these names translate and which correspond to our modern notions of different kinds of precious stones. You could make some issue out of if you wanted, but that's not the focus of the discussion today. What I want to focus in on, which may be an abstruse place to start, but in a sense, we could ignore this and just start noticing other parallels that we'll get to if we wanted to. But I think this is kind of a fun way of kicking things off. It's just to note that there are 12 gemstones and there are 4 rows, so you have 4 groups of 3. And if you imagine a rectangular arrangement of 4 groups of 3, then as you go through those 4 rows, there are going to be 2 gemstones that will be entirely surrounded, right? You have 3 and 3 and 3 and 3. And so since the rectangle is 3 by 4, the narrower part of the rectangle is 3 wide, which means that there's just going to be 1 row in the middle. That's the kind of central row. But then in the 4 long direction, you're going to have 2 middle positions and then 2 outer positions. And so when you intersect the middle with the middle, you're going to get these 2 central positions. And you can infer what they must be, assuming these things are arranged in geometric order. And I'm reading this straight from Chumash, so if this point gets complicated by Torah Shebal Peh, then so be it. Again, I don't think it's going to really ultimately produce problems for us and what else we want to talk about in Parashat Mishpatim itself. But it's notable. So when you go to asking the question, which rows are going to contribute to the center, it should be second and the third row and the second position in each of those rows. So it's Uhator Hasheni Nofech Sapir Uyahalom. So Sapir is in the second position of the second row, so that's one of them. Sapphire, perhaps. Sapir. Uhator Shlishi Leshem Shvo U'ahlama. And the third position is Leshem Shvo and Ahlama. So Shvo is in the second position. So Sapir and Shvo are the 2 gems that have this property of being central in Choshen Mishpat, which you could say, oh, well, why do we need to make anything out of this? And there are all sorts of gemstones. But at the end of the day, one can't help wondering, is the Torah going to try to make some kind of point by this, saying these are central somehow, like at the center of the Choshen Mishpat that the Kohen is wearing, that somehow is going to be emphasizing something with the choice, particularly of these 2 gemstones. And since we don't know that much about exactly what these gemstones are, or at least it's much harder to pull things out from the standpoint of geology or whatever else, or mineralogy, so maybe one could try, especially, if you're asking the question exactly what Shvo is. Sapphire, maybe it's more obviously sapphire, although even things like that are kind of slippery when you're talking about words used in Chumash. But rather than try to go that route of mineralogy, which I think is probably pretty treacherous, we can just say, well, what are other places where these words appear? And that's why I think Parashat Mishpatim is an interesting subject here, because there's a passage at the end of Parashat Mishpatim where the word sapir and a word very much like shvo, in fact, without vowels, it's identical, and even with values, it's nearly identical. The word shvu and sapir appear very close together at the end of Parashat Mishpatim. So let's look at that now. So we have, several verses. We won't read all of them, but this is about this kind of vision beheld by the elite, the Kohanim, the priests, and also the elders of Israel. ויעל משה ואהרון נדב ואביהו ושבעים מזקני ישראל ויראו את אלוהי ישראל ותחת רגליו כמעשה לבנת הספיר וכעצם השמיים לטוהר. So Moses, Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up, and how do you translate this? It's troubling, exactly what to say, and they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet a kind of paved work of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for its clearness. And then we go a few more verses down, and it adds, ולזקנים אמר שבו לנו בזה עד אשר נשוב עליכם והנה אהרון וחור עמכם מבעל דברים ייגש עליהם. And he said to the elders, wait here for us until we come again to you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. If any man have any matters, let them come to him. ויעל משה אל ההר ויכס הענן את ההר. And Moshe went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount. וישכון כבוד אדוני על הר סיני, ויכסהו הענן ששת ימים, ויחל משה ביום השביעי מתוך הענן. So the glory of God, the glory of the Lord, abode upon the mount of Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the seventh day, he called to Moshe from the midst of the cloud. So that's all I want to read explicitly. And at the outset, you could just say, okay, this is a passage. It so happens there's mention of Sapphire, there's mention of a word like shvo, which is shvu. Is that really something to make something out of? And the first thing you could point out is that Sapphire does not get mentioned that much. It gets mentioned in the context of Hosh and Mishpat. It gets mentioned here. In Chumash itself, I want to say that maybe it's not mentioned anywhere else. But I don't think there's any other mention in Chumash of Sapphire itself. It gets mentioned in Yechezkel and other places, in Tanakh. But this is one rare place where Sapphire is mentioned explicitly. And then we also have this shvu word. There are more instances of something like shvu, but not that many. And so shvu with Sapphire, when shvu and Sapphire are in the center of Chosh Mishpat, is kind of saying to you, maybe look at this passage and ask yourself, why are these things appearing here together? And what is this telling you? So, again, that whole preface you could discard, and you could just say, I would like to understand this passage in Parashat Mishpatim better when Moshe is going up. And really, just by noticing this particular verse and trying to say, what can we make out of this? What does it mean? There really is another passage that it connects to that we could just get from direct textual comparison that's in Parashat Bereshit. And that is at the moment of Akedat Yitzchak. So, first of all, just recapping this moment where Moshe is going to be going up and receiving the Torah. This is on Har Sinai. And he's saying to the elders, Ve'el hazkanim amar shvu lanu bazeh ad asher nashuv alechem. So he says to the elders, wait here for us until we come again. And he mentions Aaron and Hur are there to answer questions and to lead them. So now we take the idea of shvu sitting here with some group until we return ad nashuv alechem to you all. Where did we hear that before? There is another place where shvu appears. Not that many other places I mentioned, but some. And the first is in Akedat Yitzchak, where Avram has approached Har Moriah, a different mountain actually. So it's also the other holy mountain. Instead of Sinai, it's the Temple Mount. So it's Vayomer Avraham el Ne'arau shvu lachem po im hachamor shmu lachem po im hachamor v'ani v'hana'ar nircha ad כה ונשתחווה ונשובה עליכם. So again, shvu lachem instead of shvu lanu. It's on a mountain, and it says, we will go up or we'll go over there. Nashuva aleichem is like ad nashuv aleichem. So there's a number of different direct textual parallels. Here it's a little different. There are details that are different. And Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the chamor, with the donkey, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come back to you. So this is a very significant moment in the life of Abraham. This is the turning point of the Akedah, where Abraham, well, I don't know, there are multiple turning points, but this is the moment where Abraham separates from others that were traveling with them. The Midrash has it that it's Eliezer, Dameshek, and Ishmael, but that doesn't have to be the case. In any case, it's others who have come with him in Yitzhak, but now he and Yitzhak have to go up alone together, right? That they somehow are going, they're separating from other people and going on this unique mission of theirs up to the Temple Mount where Yitzhak is to be bound, and then there's going to be the whole episode there with the substitution of the sacrifice and everything. But I think at the basic level, we could just say that the Torah is asking us to compare these two moments where Moshe is going up the mountain and going up with Aaron, that there's some separation. In this case, he's not going up with Aaron. Let's get back to, so just to recap it again. So we're again in Sefer Shemot. ואל הזקנים אמר שבו לנו בזה עד אשר נשוב עליכם והנה אהרון והור עמכם מבעל דברים ייגש עליהם. So it's ויקם משה ויהושע משרתו ויעל משה אל הר האלוהים. So it's Moses and Yehoshua, his servant or his student, are going up the mountain. So again, it's two people, and it's not just two people, but it's Moshe and the one who in the next generation will take the baton from him, right? Yehoshua leads the people after Moshe. So the same way that Yitzhak takes the baton from Avraham, Moshe gives the baton to Yehoshua. And they're going up and they're saying to this greater, more sort of, or less exceptional group, stay here and wait for us. And we're meant to somehow understand one of these passages in light of the other, and obviously that can always work both ways. It's maybe easier to understand what's happening on its own in the case of Avraham Avinu, right? Avraham is going up the mountain to serve Hashem with Yitzhak, who is the next generation. So it's this emblem of intergenerational continuity in Avodat Hashem, the beginning of the Israelite nation, as a familial group that has a religious commitment and a law, and that it's all wrapped together into nationhood dedicated to service of Hashem. And that requires a separation from other people, right? That's the notion of Am Yisrael as a nation that dwells alone. And in a way, the sort of perhaps the tinge of sadness in that, because there is at some level a desire to recognize our common bond with humanity that the Torah begins with, right? But in order to serve Hashem properly, there has to be this separation. But there's this key completion of that message, which is not just Shvu lechem po wani wa na'ar nechad ku nishtahaweh, like, stay here and we're going to go up and worship. You stay here at the bottom of the mountain. You don't matter. We matter. We're going up to be with Hashem. It's when ishtahaweh, we'll worship, we'll bow down. When nashuva alechem, and we will return to you. That the point is, the model that's advocated by the Torah is that you establish this mamlechet kohanim, this holy nation that begins with Avraham and Yitzchak, and that they develop a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu by serving him on his mountain, and then they come back. They go back to the people that had stayed at the bottom of the mountain, because the whole point of that is actually connect all of humanity to Hashem. And that's achieved through this separation, through this priestly role that Am Yisrael are called to have by the Torah. But that's being delineated fairly directly in this representation that we see with Avraham and Yitzchak. And the only curious detail maybe is Shvu lachem po im hamor, here with a donkey, stay here with a donkey, which seems degrading maybe, but I think we can make something better out of that. It's an unclear detail, although or a detail of unclear significance at first. Although I will say that it does help clinch our sense that we've hit on something that we need to understand. Why? Because if we look at another instance of the word shvu, in fact, the next one that comes in Sefer Bereshit, it appears at the time when Yaakov Avinu is having this kind of ambassadorial conversation with the city of Shechem and the king of Shechem and the prince of Shechem, because there's been this episode with Dinah, and now people are trying to make peace, which it won't ultimately end that way, because Shimon and Levi are going to come and destroy the city of Shechem and sack it. But what the people of Shechem are saying, and the king of Shechem are saying, is, "V'itanu teshevu u'ha'aretz tihiyeh lifnechem shvu usharuha v'he'ahazu bah." So you should live with us, and the land will be before you, live and trade in it and get possessions in it. So the people of Shechem are saying, look, it's in your economic interest to just let bygones be bygones, marry Dinah into the royalty here, become part of our nation. We'll all get rich together by trading with each other and benefiting from each other's knowledge and talents. This argument for, in a sense, the opposite of that kind of separation, right? And isn't it interesting? What is the name of the king of Shechem who's making this case to Yaakov for unification? וידבר חמור איתם לאמור, שכם בני חשכה נפשו בביתכם, תנו נא אותה לו לאישה. So it begins with the king Hamor, whose name means donkey, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. I beg you to give her to him for a wife." And he proposes we all intermarry and all of that. So this sort of universal brotherhood of man, and the economic benefit of that even explicitly being emphasized, this kind of globalization that's being argued for here, is being articulated by a man whose name is Hamor, is named donkey. And that, I think, is a much better explication of why it is that Avram is leaving his Na'arim, his youths or whatever, who are traveling and helping them, with, or maybe you could say his students, his disciples, whatever else, is leaving them at the bottom of the mountain, Ima Hamor, with a donkey. It's not, oh, well, you're like an animal, or it needn't, only evoke that. What it's saying is, for one thing, you're like King Hamor. You're like people, like a nation that's going to want to just have us all be part of one thing that's all the same, and to argue for the benefits of that because of all the peace that can result from intermarriage, because of all of the economic gain that can come from trade, etc. And there's something to be said for that. It's not an unreasonable argument. And I think you could even say, okay, now it's clearer why we are connecting this with the image of a hamor, with a donkey, because, in a world today where we don't make as much use of donkeys in this way, we might forget this, but the donkey was the emblem of, let's say, material prosperity through work and trade, right? That a donkey can pull a plow for you, a donkey can carry a burden from one place to another, so you can grow your goods in one place and harvest them and carry them into another place and sell them. The donkey is the basis for an economy that extends over space and connects people. And more generally, I think can be thought of as representing the possibility of ranging over the earth and transporting oneself and conquering the earth and having a kind of material success in the world. So when Avram is saying Shvu lechem po im hamor, he's saying, look, stay here with material opportunity, with globalization, with the universal brotherhood of man, ... and we'll come back to you. We're interested in that. That's not something that we merely intend to eschew and reject, as many different kinds of pietistic, ascetic, spiritual seekers have done throughout time with various brands associated with them, right? One way of relating to all of that is to say, well, that's the material world. We're going to go up and be with the creator of the world. We're going to be with the spiritual essence of the universe. And we don't need material. We don't need wealth. We don't need prosperity. We don't need other people. We don't need that connection. We just need to connect with God. And if that were the case, it would make sense for one man to go up the mountain, indeed. And why do two people need to do it? But that's not what Am Yisrael is about. Am Yisrael is about two people are going up because they're going to be a nation. And so it's already about sharing in a community that's based in this world, that's going to be a nation that has that common language and that common experience of connection with Hashem. But there's also this v'nashuva aleichem, right? That ultimately this is about ki mitzion tetzeh Torah. From Zion, Torah is going to go out. Udavar Adonai Yerushalayim, and the word of Hashem from Jerusalem. That we ultimately have an outward-facing approach to things where we have to perfect our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu so that it can enable a better relationship between all of humankind and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we'll get to this again in a different way, but that's another reason why it's probably a donkey, because as many people are aware, there's a famous midrash about Biat HaMashiach, the coming of the anointed king of Israel who will build the temple and usher in an era of sovereignty in the land that will lead to a new possibility of relationship to humanity as a nation of priests bearing the message of Torah and connection with Hashem. That there are two opinions about how Mashiach will come. One is al hamor, on a donkey, and the other is al anani kavod, on clouds of glory. And usually we are told that statement about Mashiach is derived from a passage in Zechariah Hanavi, in the prophet Zechariah, where it seems more explicitly like there's two different kinds of references, maybe to some kind of messianic figure, and there's mention of someone riding on a donkey. And even then, the interpretation we already been giving to a donkey, you can give there too, and you can say, look, at some level, Biat HaMashiach has to come from spirituality, whatever you want to call that, or from something heavenly, about connection with Hashem, about the ideas, about the laws, about the concepts, about things that are otherworldly, things that are miraculous, etc. But also there's, Mashiach will come al hamor, will come slowly but ploddingly on a donkey, rooted in the material world, rooted in the necessity of material strength and power and success to carry into being the things that have to happen, right? That if you're going to build a temple, you're going to need to drag some heavy things up a hill in order to build with them. Then maybe you'll need donkeys for that. Or even if you use mechanized equipment instead, the donkey represents the idea that these things are not going to happen unless you actually have the means to do them. And having means being sort of connected to the world and the economy and that which material requires of you. So that's an aspect of Mashiach that we can get from this comment of Chazal, of the sages, about how we're going to bring about the kingdom of Hashem on earth through the kingdom of a Judaic leader who will be serious about getting the people to serve Hashem according to his Torah in the land and on his mountain and all of that. So, as I said, we have heard previously that midrash, that famous midrash about Mashiach, is about Zechariah Navi. But I think a remarkable thing about Chumash, about the 5 books of Moses, is that even the rest of Tanakh, at some level, even the rest of the Hebrew Bible, at some level, you might almost say that prophets are commenting on 5 books of Moses and explicating things that are already apparent there. And we can see that in more than one way now in this comparison that we're making to Parashat Mishpatim. Because in this Shavu moment of Parashat Mishpatim, now let's go back there again. He said to the elders, wait here for us until we come again. And behold, Aaron and Hor are here with you. And if any man may have matters, let him come to them. And then it says, and Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount, and the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai, etc. So we don't have a donkey here, right? But we just proved that this is a donkey moment, right? Yishvu lanu bazeh. Let's, sit here. Asher nashuv alechem. So ad asher nashuv alechem, until we return to you. That moment is evoking the Hamor moment of the binding of Isaac. So there's no Hamor in the text here itself, but it's clear as day that this moment is referent to Shvu lechem poim Hamor, when Avram says it. So then, right afterwards, the next 2 verses are the cloud covers the mount, and the glory of Hashem dwelt upon the mount. So that's the clouds of glory. It's the other half of that midrash. So the midrash from Chazal that's saying Mashiach is going to come either on a donkey or in clouds of glory, that's this moment. And then you might say, well, but where's Mashiach, right? How are we supposed to get that here? And that's the remaining details that we have just staring us in the face. Because it says, okay, it's Asher nashuv alechem v'hine Aharon v'Hor imachem, right? You're gonna wait until we come back to you, and here Aaron and Hor are here with you. So Aaron and Hor, who are they? You're the high priest, and Hor is in this line of the tribe of Judah that is going to produce Bezalel. Bezalel is the craftsman who creates the Mishkan, right? He creates the physical abode for Hashem in this world that's going to be on the other mountain that Abram was going up. And Hor is going to do that so that Aaron's sons, the Kohanim, the priests, can serve Hashem on that mountain. So Aaron and Hor together, we've talked about other things they represent, but Aaron and Hor together represent the temple. They represent the Mikdash. They represent Har HaBayit, Har Moriah, where Avram does his first, stay here with the donkey moment. And to the extent that they do, they of course also represent Mashiach, right? Because what makes Mashiach, other than the fact that the word Mashiach in Torah most frequently appears in conjunction with the sons of Aaron because they are anointed priests, and Mashiach just means anointed. But also the idea of a Melech Mashiach, an anointed king. First of all, Hur is from Judah, from the tribe of Judah, the tribe of the Davidic line. Second of all, the building of the temple itself is the essence of what makes David this eternal dynasty, right? David and Shlomo become the eternal dynasty for Malchut, for kingship in Israel, because they're the ones, unlike Shaul, who came before, who prepared to build the temple and who build the temple. And that's inextricable or inseparable from what makes David's dynasty an eternal relationship with Hashem that is promised to last forever. And so, to the degree that we're referencing the temple here, the Mikdash, we're also referencing the idea of Mashiach. And in fact, you can make that even more explicit if you want. Now, this thing I was saying before about the other books of the Hebrew Bible actually already kind of being midrashic in their way, or like they're preparations for the midrashim of Chazal, that they are filling in blanks that make it easier for Chazal to make the right midrash. Because what do we know from midrash? What do we know from Divrei Yamim, from elsewhere in Tanakh? We know that Hor was the son of Ephrat. So it says in Divrei Yamim, "V'tamat azuva v'yikach lo chalev et Ephrat v'taled lo et Hor." So in Divrei Yamim, we get that Hor's mother is Ephrat, and Kalev is his father. So other things we could make out of that and have at other times, but what I want to emphasize here is the point that Ephrat, what's the name of Ephrat have to do with anything? Ephrat is the place in the Torah itself where Yaakov buries Rachel when she dies, giving birth to Binyamin. And it says that's on the way to Bethlehem, to the place that David will come from, right? Once you mention Bethlehem, you're talking about the Davidic dynasty. You're talking about Hamelech HaMashiach. So to the degree that you're talking about Hamelech HaMashiach, you are doing so with mention of Hor if it's read in light of this other comment in Divrei Yamim. Like without the comment in Divrei Yamim, you have to get the idea of Mashiach directly from just, well, this is about the temple, right? So to the degree that it's about the temple, it's about the Messianic king. But once you have Divrei Yamim, now it's saying, well, okay, from Hor we get Ephrat, from Ephrat we get Bethlehem. And so, that cements it even more strongly that we're really talking about David, Shlomo, and all of that, the Davidic line. And remember, this passage, as we have already established in the Torah itself, is the passage about the donkey and the clouds of glory. So we've reconstructed this midrash from Chazal about Mashiach coming on a donkey and clouds of glory. And it all in a sense is living in this sequence of several verses at the end of Parashat Mishpatim. And now, the question is going back to that passage, going back to that shvu, going back to the shvu lanu bazeh in Parashat Mishpatim, like stay here at the bottom of the mountain while I go up, or while we go up, while Yehoshua and Moshe go up. What are we supposed to make of this? I mean, we understand maybe what Chazal were saying about the Midrash, and you can make your own analysis of that Midrash like we already did. We say, okay, so if we're going to rebuild the temple, we need to have donkeys, like we need to have material strength. We also need to have connection to Hashem. We need to have the cloud of glory. But what greater understanding do we get from seeing how this is laid out in the text of the Torah itself? Are there more connections we can draw? Are there clearer explications we can make of what the point of the Midrash might be making now that it's saying, look, read this through this passage in Parashat Mishpatim that's really about Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. It's about Moshe and Yehoshua going up the mountain, that it's about receiving the Torah from Hashem when the clouds of glory are covering the mountain, and with some sense of, who's at the bottom of the mountain and what does that mean? So I think there are a few interesting points to make here. One, which after several other shiurim that we've done might be the most obvious, is that this has a clear connection to the battle with Amalek, right? Because Amalek is fought by Yehoshua, who's at the bottom of the mountain, or at the bottom of the hill, while Moshe and Aaron and Hur are up on top of the hill, and Aaron and Hur helping Moshe hold his staff aloft, and Yeshua is successful in battle with Amalek when the staff is held aloft. And so Moshe needs Aaron and Hur to help him. So it's not the same, but it's so much the same that we have to see these things in light of each other and say, okay, this is another perspective on that battle with Amalek, or from another perspective, using it's another perspective on Matan Torah and Biat Mashiach and building of the temple and reading it in connection with the battle with Amalek. So obviously, practically speaking, it's always relevant to wonder, how do we defeat Amalek? Because right now we're in a war with Amalek. And the point there would be that, yes, it's about the staff and it's about Aaron and Hur and everything that we've said already, focusing on that passage earlier on about the battle with Amalek. But here what we're seeing is that it's also about specifically the idea of intergenerational continuity in the transmission of the Torah that's received at Sinai, so Moshe to Yehoshua. It's also about the transition from Moshe to Yehoshua being about the transition from diaspora or desert wandering to conquest and sovereignty over the land with Yehoshua. And it's also about what's so interesting is that in this version, it's Aaron and Hur who are staying down at the bottom of the mountain with the donkey, so to speak. And why is that? It's because the point is that from the perspective of this passage, Aaron and Hur are the practical, material, physical plant of how you defeat Amalek, because they are the practical, material, physical plant of how you serve Hashem in the land, specifically having to do with the avodah that you do on Har HaBayit. That there's something essential about taking hold of the land, taking hold of Yerushalayim, taking hold of Har HaBayit, and building a temple there so that it can become this complex symbolic focal point of national identity, that ultimately that is going to be what gives us the strength to defeat or win over, Amalek, whatever way you want the Amalekite idea to disappear. And it's probably going to be a mixture of both. But that we have to, at one level, see Aaron and Hur staying at the bottom of the mountain because there's a realism about that. Like that you can't just go up the mountain and stay in the clouds and have amazing ideas and commune with Hashem in this kind of otherworldly level of understanding. It's also the case, at the end of the day, that you need to have something that's for everyone, that's here on earth, with a donkey, so to speak, that ultimately produces a set of physical events here in the land on one particular hill that people can participate in and experience and relate to in different ways. And then, by the way, is also the way you invite the rest of humanity in, right? So this is another reason why Aaron and Hur are being connected with the people who are being excluded by Abraham when he and Yitzchak go up the mountain. Because he says, V'nashuva aleichem, we're going to return to you. This is about, ultimately, as we said at the beginning, talking to all of humanity. So how do we talk to all of humanity? We can't talk to all of humanity, really, unless we have the temple. Because the temple is this place for, really, in fact, all of mankind to address themselves to Hashem if they want to. And that's something we learn elsewhere from our Nevi'im, right? That this is a Beit Tfilah for all nations. And if we are going to reconnect and we're going to go up the mountain and come back down and bring a message as a nation, then the means of doing that are Aaron and Hur. And in another sense, the means of doing that are an approach to Judaic sovereignty in the land of Israel that supports the construction and flourishing and functioning of the temple. In other words, the Bet Alachmi, the Bethlehemite, we need the Davidic idea to return to our politics. We need the idea of the centrality of a Judaic temple on Har Moriah to our national identity, in order for us to fulfill our purpose as understood by the Torah in relationship to the rest of humanity, which is to make it possible for the whole world to learn about Hashem and about His Torah through the example that we set and through the lessons that we are only capable of teaching once we have sufficiently developed and corrected our own understanding of sovereignty and identity in our own land and with our own particular relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.